Well, good morning, Avalon. It's good to be with you guys this morning. My name is Matt, and I serve as one of our pastors here at Avalon. And I have a confession to make to you this morning as we start. I was hoping to hold off till November, but my winter coat came out this weekend. And I'm just saying, you're going to see me in it for probably like the next 9 months, so get used to it. I am wearing wool socks currently. Not dealing well with this cold that's coming in, but it's Indiana. It's an inevitability. Well, we are in just about 60 minutes. We are wrapping up another amazing week of 24/7 prayer. Now, yep. And our church family responded so well. You all filled 168 hours in our prayer room. And it was an incredible week. We're going to celebrate that, kind of the close of that at the end of the service. But one thing I wanted to comment on. I don't know if you got a chance to pray this week, but we moved this wall of courage into the prayer room during 24/7 prayer. And let me tell you, I was just blown away by the way that you responded last week with our fear and courage cards. It was incredible as I spent time just reading and praying over each card, praying for each one of you, to just read the way that you poured out your hearts into these cards, the way that you shared your fears, and the way that you just have this longing and yearning to take a step of courage in these areas. I was just moved to read of your fear of being alone or being rejected, moved by your fear of not being accepted into heaven. You wrote about the fear of something happening to your kids or your grandkids or family members, fear of difficult conversations you need to have, fears of being insignificant or forgotten, or the fear that you will never be able to overcome your struggles or habits. I thank you. I'm so proud of the way that you were just honest and vulnerable. Now, my card up there on one of those panels, I wrote, man, God, one of my biggest fears is trusting other people and even trusting you. Sometimes I just struggle to trust that your plans for me are good. So my courageous action step in this series is to ask more people for help and to have a sit down with God and say, God, I'm just struggling to trust you right now. I just want to be honest about that. And I want us to just be in that together. So this courage wall is going to kind of sit here and be a picture, be a visual throughout this whole courageous series. And you can see, if you look over there right now, you can see some of those cards are changing from white to color. And what I love is this. The top card is our fear card, but the card underneath is our courage card. And throughout the series, as you all take courageous steps that you feel that God is inviting you to take, that wall is going to begin to come alive with color. And so we invite you, as throughout this series, as you take the courageous step God is calling you to take, it doesn't have to be during the service, before or after, whenever, but to go over, to find your card, and to move that courage card on top. And we're going to get to see through the next 7 weeks this family of Avalon taking courageous steps and seeing God work in incredible ways in our lives. Now, we're going to block out a little bit of time towards the end of service to continue to interact with that wall. If you didn't have a chance to put your cards on there last week, or maybe God's given you clarity or a new action step to take, we're going to give you time to just place those on the wall and say, God, I'm afraid of this, but I want to step out in courage and trust you. So we're going to keep working on that throughout this series. Man, there was a lot that happened in the first week of this series. I'm so excited for what is coming up for the rest of it. This morning and in the weeks ahead in the Courageous series, we are going to look at stories of courage. And this morning, we're going to look at 2 courageous women. We're going to look at the story of Ruth from the Bible, and then we're going to hear from one of the women here at Avalon that I think is one of the most courageous people that I know. So, the story of Ruth. Some of you are going to hate this because you love Ruth, but I'm going to do like the 50,000 foot flyby of this story, okay? So there's going to be gross oversimplifications. We're going to go through it fast, but just go with me, and then I'll share a few points on that. I have put some verses in your sermon notes and up on the screen. Those are there for your reference. I'm just going to summarize the story, and then we'll talk about it a little bit. So, key things to know in this story. Things are really bad in Israel, okay? This is the time of the Judges, which is like a dark spot in Israel's history. Really bad time. In addition to that, there's a famine in the land so bad that Elimelech and Naomi and their family have to move to Moab. So if you don't know, Moab is like a long-standing enemy of Israel. So the famine is so bad that Elimelech and Naomi move their family into enemy territory. That's how serious this is. So things are bad, and we're about to get to more bad, okay? So when they move to the land of Moab, soon after they get there, Elimelech, the husband and father, dies. The sons marry Moabite women, but over the course of the next 10 years, both sons die, okay? So Naomi went to Moab with a husband and 2 sons, and over 10 years, she's lost her whole immediate family. Everyone's died. Think about this. Can you imagine losing your whole immediate family? Can you imagine losing your spouse and then losing all of your children? Everyone dying. She does, however, have these 2 daughter-in-laws who we see love Naomi very much. But as Naomi's working through and processing through these things, she's saying, there's nothing for me here anymore. My family's dead. I'm not even from this land. This is a foreign country. So Naomi decides to go back to Bethlehem, where she's from, and to be back among extended family members. She tells her 2 daughter-in-laws, Orpah and Ruth, she said, you don't need to come with me. There's no point in coming with me. You have nothing. All your family's here. This is your familiar land and country. Stay here. Orpah says, okay, I will. And Ruth, as we see right out of the gate, this incredible woman, she says, I'm going to stick with you. Now think about this for a minute. Ruth is leaving behind her whole family, her country, her culture, everything she knows, and she's going to step into a country where she is an immigrant, a foreigner, and really viewed as an enemy. So that kind of frames like what she's doing, the steps that she's taking. But she is so committed to Naomi in a place where Naomi is at rock bottom. So Ruth makes this commitment when Naomi is at the lowest point in her life. And she says, God's doing something here, and I'm going to go with you. This is where we get those famous words that many of us know where Ruth says, don't ask me to leave you and turn back. Wherever you go, I will go. Wherever you live, I will live. Your people will be my people, and your God will be my God. We usually stop there, but she goes on to say, wherever you die, I will die, and I will be buried there. May the Lord punish me severely if I allow anything but death to separate us. Guys, this is a daughter-in-law talking to a mother-in-law. Do you know that daughter-in-laws and mother-in-laws don't always have the best relationship? She's saying these powerful words of commitment to her mother-in-law to go with her. So it says, when Naomi saw that Ruth was determined to go with her, she said nothing more. And the 2 of them continued on their journey. So we see Ruth making this radical commitment, right? It doesn't even really make sense. Why would she go with Naomi? There's nothing for her there. But she commits to being this loyal companion and friend to Naomi. So Ruth and Naomi, they go back to Bethlehem together, but things are still not good. So this is 2 widows living in poverty, okay? And in that time, that was a very vulnerable place to be in. But Ruth continues to show this love and commitment for Naomi. She says, you know what, Naomi, we need food. We don't have money, we don't have food. I'm just going to go into the fields and I'm going to collect like the scraps of the produce, just the things that they leave behind to provide for you. So she goes and she goes into one of these local fields and she starts to collect food, collect produce. And I mean, this is going to be super short, making a long story super short, but she ends up in the field of Boaz, who is a relative of Naomi's. Boaz is impressed with Ruth, and through this kind of cultural practice they had called being a kinsman redeemer, Boaz marries Ruth so that she can carry on the family name of Elimelech and his family. They get married, and we see this incredible picture of restoration and redemption. You've got Naomi and Ruth, vulnerable, poor widows, Ruth being this immigrant, and they go from having nothing to being restored into a family and having all of their needs met. Incredible turnaround that they have experienced. So I want to make 3 short points about the courage that Ruth shows throughout this story. The first point is this: Ruth was an outsider. She was a foreigner. She was an immigrant. But because of her courageous choices, God used her in powerful ways. Now, think about this. Her marriage to Naomi's son would have been considered a sin. Like, the Israelites did not look kindly on marrying foreign women. So, even just her marriage, her relationship would be a sin, would be considered frowned upon. And not only that, but Ruth is a Moabite, which is the enemy of the people of Israel. I mean, think about, this is like if us as Americans, if one of us married like a person from North Korea or Iran or Syria or pick a country. Like, this is marrying the enemy. So Ruth is coming into Israel as an enemy. She's coming in with this foreigner status on. And I just want to take a moment to speak to you this morning, those of you that feel like you're on the outside, like you're an outcast, that you're on the fringes, that you don't belong. You might be sitting here this morning thinking, God could never use me. I'm a nobody. I have nothing to offer. I made too many poor choices in my life. I've messed up too many times. You might be thinking, I'm not the right skin color, I'm not the right gender, I'm not the right socioeconomic status, I'm not the right sexual orientation, I'm not the right level of education. But let me tell you this morning, to people that think they are outsiders in this world, God says to you, you're in. You're in. You're a part of this. I love you and I accept you. You're in. Look at this quote from a study Bible that I use. This is the opening statement and kind of the summary of the book of Ruth in my study Bible. It says this: God often uses the most unlikely people to accomplish his plans and purposes. Now, in the world, we look for the most talented, the most beautiful, the most influential, the most famous and powerful. God often uses the most unlikely people to accomplish his plans and purpose. So if you're sitting here this morning thinking that you're a nobody, a loser, a failure, damaged goods, insignificant, or worthless, I want you to know this morning that God has incredible ways that he wants to use you. God has incredible plans for your life. He doesn't operate by the same perspectives and way that we see things. Be encouraged that God took a nobody like Ruth, a poor immigrant widow, and gives her one of the greatest privileges in history. Point number 2. Ruth was a friend and companion to Naomi. She made a commitment to someone who was deeply suffering. Now, think about this, guys. Put yourself in Naomi's shoes. Can you imagine losing your whole family? If you're a parent, can you imagine all of your kids dying before you, losing all of your kids? Not only that, but Naomi actually thinks that God is the one that is taking her family members from her. Look at this in Ruth 1:20. She says, "Don't call me Naomi. Instead, call me bitter. For the Almighty has made life very bitter for me." I went away full, but the Lord has brought me home empty. Why call me Naomi when the Lord has caused me to suffer and the Almighty has sent such tragedy on me? I don't know what you believe about this. I don't believe that God sends the suffering to you all, to me. Naomi here is blaming God, attributing God. I actually believe that God doesn't send that. It's just a part of being in a broken world. But here's this woman who is suffering just in unimaginable ways. The lowest point in her life, and she thinks that God is just taking it all from her. God is making her life miserable. This is some of the deepest suffering and pain that you can imagine. This past week, I was reminded of a large group of people that suffer right here in our community, in every community. On Monday, Pastor Kate Paul and Pastor Sydney and I had the opportunity to attend a conference about the church's role in mental health. Now, listen to the statistic that I was reminded of at this conference. Both the National Alliance for Mental Illness and the Center for Disease Control have found that 50% of adults in America will experience mental illness at some point in their life. 50%. That means 50% of us in this room here today have experienced or will experience in some point in their life mental illness. Now, mental illness is a continuum. There's lots of things on there: depression, anxiety, bipolar, all sorts of things. But mental illness affects so many of us, and it touches all of our families, all churches, all communities. I want to be honest with you guys this morning. I'm part of that 50%. I've shared with you my story along the way that one of the things that I deal with in my life is depression. And at times, diagnosable depression. I've been through seasons, just dark, paralyzing seasons of depression. And I know that many of you, whatever it is, have experienced some of these same types of things. Now, why do I bring this up in a conversation about Ruth? 2 reasons. If you are part of the 50% of adults who have or will experience mental illness in your lifetime, I want you to know this. Avalon is a safe place for you. Avalon's a safe place for you. And Avalon is also a safe place for us to talk about mental illness. We want you to know that it's okay not to be okay here at Avalon, and that we are committed to breaking the stigma around mental illness and talking about it. This is a safe place for you. It's a safe place for your family and friends and neighbors and coworkers. The second reason I bring up mental illness is this. Ruth was a person who was a friend and companion to someone who was experiencing some of the deepest pain and suffering that a person can go through. Now, I have walked with many, many people affected by or experiencing mental illness, and I can tell you that it is some of the deepest pain and suffering that you can experience. As I prepared the message this week, I sensed that God wanted us to ask this question of ourselves. In the same way Ruth committed to Naomi, who in your life needs you to be a Ruth to them right now? Who in your life needs you to be a loyal companion and friend, to make a commitment to them in this season? Could be a family member or friend affected by mental illness. It could be someone you know that's suffering in some way, in any sort of way. It could be a people group in our community who's struggling, people dealing with mental illness, immigrants, kids in foster care. Who is God asking you to be a Ruth to right now? In the Bible, the meaning of names is extremely significant. If you ever want to have a fun activity. Just get a Bible dictionary, look up the meaning of names in the Bible. It's incredible. While I was studying this week, I looked up Ruth's name. Do you know what it means? Ruth's name means compassionate friend and companion. Isn't that incredible? It's like God had created her for this moment, for this time. So I ask again, who in your life right now needs you to be a Ruth to them? Compassionate friend, compassionate companion. This just might be the courageous step that God is inviting you to take during this series. And then the third point I want to share from Ruth's life is that courage for her wasn't just one decision. Courage for Ruth was a series of courageous steps that she took. She committed to Naomi and chose to go with her. She chose a hard job to provide for Naomi. She chose to be humble and grateful in the midst of suffering. She chose to be generous even when she didn't have much. She committed to integrity even in the face of adversity. And she was good to Naomi, and she enriched her life. I could talk much more about this point, but I would rather let you hear a real story that exemplifies it. When I think about courageous people at Avalon, Rebecca Serratos is one of the first people that comes to mind. Rebecca has been on an amazing journey of courage the past 2 years. And so I've asked Rebecca to come and share her story with us. Would you please join me in giving a warm welcome to Rebecca.
Good morning. I used to think of courage as taking a huge leap of faith, like someone deciding to sell all their possessions and go into missions. This is certainly a very bold and courageous step, but on my faith journey, I've learned that courage is taking one day at a time and being willing to take one small step of obedience after another. My courageous journey began about 2 years ago. I'd been a casual attender at Avalon for about 18 years and had given my life to Christ as a small child. I heard people talk about the change that happened when you invited Jesus into your heart, but I never experienced it. As the years passed, I grew further from God. Then on Easter 2017, my life changed when I saw cardboard testimonies for the first time. I began attending church more regularly and learned that I was not out of reach of God's life-changing grace. In November of 2017, Avalon had a baptism service. That Sunday, I was on pins and needles, barely able to focus on the worship and on the sermon. The baptisms began. One by one, I saw people give their lives over to Christ, and I was overcome by emotion. At the end of the baptisms, Pastor K. Paul extended an open invitation. Without even thinking about it, I handed my things to my mom and said, I'm going up there. I was baptized in what I was wearing and drove home soaking wet and freezing cold. I'd rededicated my life to Christ, and the transformation was unbelievable. I had lived most of my life believing I could handle everything on my own, but now I had an overwhelming desire to connect with others. That same afternoon, I said to God, I was baptized. I obeyed you today. How do I get connected? What's next for me? About an hour later, I received an invitation to the women's ministry's ugly Christmas sweater party. I was both awestruck and terrified. God had answered my prayer, but spending a morning with a group of women I did not know was a real stretch for me. For the second time that day, I felt God tugging on my heart, and I accepted the invitation. This was my first courageous step towards building a community. The second step, go to the party. I thought about backing out 100 times, but I went to the party and I had a blast. As we were cleaning up, I felt led to share how much this invitation meant to a woman in the group. She had no idea I was praying to get connected, and I had no idea she was the leader of the women's ministry team. She thanked me for sharing, and then she invited me to serve on the team. There was no doubt in my mind that God was giving me my next step. So once again, with fear in my heart and a million reasons to say no, I said yes. My time serving on the women's ministry team has been amazing. I have developed lifelong friendships with Christian women who pushed me to grow in my relationship with Christ. The best part of this process was learning that none of these women had it all together. They were just like me. We all experienced trials, doubts, and insecurities. I'd expected to be judged for my many sins and shortcomings, but instead I was welcomed and loved as a sister in Christ. Now I'm surrounded by a growing community of incredible women who support me and encourage me every day, and it all started by accepting an invitation to a Christmas party. As my relationship with Christ grew, God began to reveal some deep hurts in my past that I'd never dealt with. My initial response was literally to run away. During a sermon that was part of Avalon's Celebrate Recovery launch, I broke down. The pain was more than I could bear. With tears streaming down my face, I put my head down and walked towards the exit, but I didn't make it very far. A friend stopped me at the back of the sanctuary and led me to the prayer room. I didn't even know we had a prayer room. She held me, she prayed with me, she comforted me, and I knew how deeply she cared about me. Eventually, I took another courageous step by telling her what my story was and sharing my pain, and she pointed me right back to God's healing power. God was at work in my life, and he weaved seemingly small and unrelated events together in unbelievable ways. As I mentioned, this revelation came as Celebrate Recovery was preparing to launch at Avalon, and the friend who prayed with me was on the Celebrate Recovery launch team. She invited me to attend Celebrate Recovery, and once again, I had a choice to make. There were a million reasons to say no. I didn't think I could share my pain with anyone else, and I doubted this program could help me. But I said yes. After a few short weeks, I knew I was home. It was so comforting to be surrounded by people who were honest and vulnerable about their struggles. Each one of us had very different issues, but we were all doing our best to lay our hurts, habits, and hang-ups at the foot of the cross. Through Celebrate Recovery, I learned the value of being honest and vulnerable about the hurts in my life. A couple months after beginning Celebrate Recovery, I had lunch with a friend and shared what I was going through. She recommended an amazing Christian counselor who typically has a very long waiting list. But when I called her after our lunch, she answered the phone, she had an opening, and she actually accepted my insurance. This was God's timing working together once again through another small step of obedience. Through counseling and Celebrate Recovery, I have begun to work through my hurts and have let go of a lot of anger and bitterness. At Celebrate Recovery, I've also been given the opportunity to serve others as I work on my journey. This began with small steps, like setting up refreshments and tearing down at the end of the night. Eventually, I was given the opportunity to teach when a ministry leader asked for people with open and willing hearts. God spoke to me and told me to step forward, and I obeyed. It was so freeing to share my story in front of a large group of people, and God spoke to me through the preparation in beautiful ways. Teaching at Celebrate Recovery gave me the confidence to say yes yet again when God asked me to speak at the women's retreat that took place just a few weeks ago. I enjoyed serving so much that I took part in a shape class earlier this year to discover my gifts and to get connected in deeper service to God. After the class ended, Pastor Matt and I met to talk about next steps. Celebrate Recovery, as you may have noticed, is very dear to my heart. And my gifts, abilities, and passions lined up with a leadership position in Celebrate Recovery. Though I was excited about this opportunity, I doubted my ability to serve as a ministry leader. As I prayed for wisdom and guidance, God revealed this was his next step for me, so I said yes. The best part about Celebrate Recovery is welcoming the newcomers every week. I get to tell them that I'm a work in progress. I do not have it all together, but I have found hope and healing through Jesus Christ. My friends, I don't know what your next step is, and maybe you don't either, but I know that if you ask God, he'll reveal it to you. I would encourage you to start moving towards that today. It's not easy to walk out in faith, but someday in the not so distant future, you're going to look back and see all the incredible ways that God has worked in your life. My life verse is Philippians 4:13. It states, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Whatever step God is asking you to take, know that he will give you the strength to do things that you never thought possible. Just say yes.
Thank you, Rebecca. What I want you to hear in Rebecca's story is how many small steps she took. Her story, these past 2 years for Rebecca have been loaded with small, courageous steps that she took. Getting baptized, getting involved in the women's ministry, taking the SHAPE class, serving, attending Celebrate Recovery, teaching. Even her sharing her story up here in front of you all is another courageous step. Rebecca has just exemplified for us that it's not the huge leap, it's being consistent and obedient to all the small, courageous steps that God lays out in front of you. And those are steps that you can take here at Avalon and in your life and in your families. I encourage you, be inspired by Rebecca's commitment to small steps of courage. What I want you to kind of take from Rebecca and from Ruth's story is this, that your decisions matter. Your choices matter. You may think that they're inconsequential, that they don't mean much, but the decisions you make, whether you choose fear or whether you choose courage, they have lasting consequences, good or bad. They have a ripple effect in your life and in the lives of the people around you. Look at Ruth, contrasted with Orpah, right? Orpah decides to stay home, go back to her family, and we never hear of her again in the Bible. She's done. But Ruth takes courageous step after courageous step after courageous step. And God, as a result of that, gives her incredible honors. The first of which is Ruth goes on to become the great-grandmother of King David. And then if you follow her lineage 45 generations down, she becomes one of the ancestors of Jesus Christ. This foreigner, this outsider, this nobody took steps of courage, and God brought her in and said, I'm going to make you a part of the family tree of the Messiah. Now think about this, guys. This is your life as well. The choices you make now, the choices you make in this series can forever change your life, can forever change your marriages and your relationships, can forever change the ways that you serve and have an impact on this world. So I want to invite you as we transition into this time of responding in courage. I want to encourage you to take those steps. Don't just sit in your seat and let it pass you by. Don't just let fear control and dictate your decisions. As we sing this last song, I want to encourage you, go to the wall. If you've taken that step of courage that God's called you to, then put that card on top. Let it be a declaration that God gave you the courage to take that step. If you haven't had a chance to put a card on the wall yet, or if this morning God said, here is your courageous step, here's what I want you to do, then I encourage you just to head over to the wall. We've got a table with the cards and pens and pins to put it on the wall. Go to the wall and just declare, God, I want to do this. I don't know how. Like Rebecca said, there's a million reasons that I could not do it. There's a million excuses I could give. Give me the courage to do it. And then we understand courage comes with a lot of need for prayer. At the end of the service, kind of after the song, we're going to have people up here again, leaders in our church that are available to pray with you. Pray for your steps of courage. Pray for just anything that's going on in your life. So I challenge you, don't just sit still. Take courageous steps of courage. This last song we're going to close with declares, my fear doesn't stand a chance when I stand in your love. That God's power is superior, is greater, is stronger than our fears. And his love holds us and supports us as we step into them. So let's sing and worship together. Let's go to the wall. Let's respond with courage this morning.